Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to this exclusive series on Snowflake native applications. Before we get started with yet another exciting content for today, here is a gentle reminder for you to subscribe to this channel if you have not done already. Now, if you think that these are the kind of videos that are helping you as a developer, please like these kind of videos because it helps me to reach to a wider audience. Would also appreciate if you can leave a comment in the comment section and let me know what are the different type of native applications that you are building. It inspires me a lot to bring back many more exciting videos for you in the future. Finally, here is a disclaimer. Any ideas or opinions expressed as a part of this particular video are solely mine and they do not necessarily reflect those of my employer. With that, let's get started. In the previous video, we have seen how to implement data security and review that from a provider perspective. In this video, we are going to review data security from a consumer perspective. At this point of time, if you have not reviewed the previous video, I would sincerely urge you to go ahead and watch it first. Because if you do not watch it, this particular video will not make much of a sense and you will not be able to connect the dots together. The best way to understand the consumer perspective of data security is to build a native application which is driven by machine learning. Because for a machine learning driven native application to be successful, you need to ensure that the model gives you the best accuracy. And best accuracy can only be achieved when the model is trained on a dataset which is provided by the consumer and not from the provider, because the provider dataset is more generic and cannot give you the best score when you perform model inferencing at the consumer end, which is on a different type of a business or maybe a different type of a dataset. Now to do that, the application will have to request access for a specific dataset on the consumer account, and the consumer will have to approve that request access. The native application framework comes into action at this point of time. The framework ensures that once the consumer approves access to a particular dataset to the application, the access is strictly restricted to this dataset and nothing else from the consumer account gets exposed to the provider. We will see all that in action once we hit VS Code. But before that, we will see a diagrammatic representation of what we just discussed.
On my screen, you see a diagram that talks about the steps that we just discussed. In a nutshell, there are three major steps. Number one, the application package is installed on the consumer account. Number two, the installed application requests access to the training dataset. Number three, the consumer approves the access request. Now, it is important to note that it is only the training dataset that gets exposed to the application. That means the application can only read and write from the training dataset, and that too depends on the privilege which are captured in the manifest file. We will see that once we head over to the VS Code. Anything else other than the training dataset, however sensitive it might be, which is residing within the consumer account, is not exposed to the application at all. The application doesn't get to know about their existence. This is how data security is achieved from a consumer perspective within the consumer account. Let's head on to VS Code. On VS Code, you see the updated manifest file. On the manifest file, what you see is I have added a bunch of reference statements. We will see what those statements are. Apart from the references, you see a bunch of changes on the left hand side of the project. Now, if you are coming straight onto this video from the previous one, you will be curious to find out what are those changes are. Though I'm using the same project native app building blocks, what I've done is I have renamed the script file names. The reason was in the previous video they were named as setup underscore v1, v2 and henceforth. What I've done is I have changed the names V1 and V2 to more meaningful names so that it makes more sense when I upload all these scripts together in a GitHub repository. I've also added a folder called test SQL wherein I have bundled all the bunch of SQLs that I'm using for each video, like the basic app SQL, consumer, data sharing consumer and data sharing provider, and versioning. With this, let's head over to the manifest file and understand this reference portion. Now, reference is something which needs to be set if an application is willing to get access to a data set which is beyond its installed boundary. If I go over to the documentation, you will see the following example shows how to define a reference in the manifest.yml file for a table in the consumer account that already exists outside the application object. Right? And how do you do that? Under the reference tab, you mention the consumer name, label description, most importantly, the privileges, insert or select. In our case, we are requesting only for the select privilege. Object type multi-valued equals to false, and finally the callback stored procedure. Now if you see, the callback stored procedure is named as the register underscore single reference in the documentation. However, here I have named it as update reference. It really doesn't matter as long as this object exists in the code artifacts that you upload onto your native app stage. A close look at the stored procedure register single reference, you will see that it expects three parameters, the reference name and the operations being the primary ones. Based on the operation value, that is add or remove and clear, these are the two system functions which are called. So system $set reference with the reference name and the alias, system remove reference with the reference name, and it does the job. So to establish access to a reference object, this particular store procedure needs to be called with the necessary parameters. Moving on to VS Code, let's open setup for data share consumer. And what I see is there's the store procedure which you exactly saw on the documentation, just with a different name in this case. And there's another store procedure which tries to read the data from the reference which is getting established in this particular stored procedure. So it is this stored procedure that gets executed first, and then once the reference is set up, you can call the reference object using this reference function. So select star from all the columns of that particular table which are set under the reference of the logical name housing data. So housing data is nothing but a logical name which is mentioned out here. Okay, so any object can get access. You can assign any object from your consumer side to this logical name housing data, and then you can read the values of that particular table. Let's head over to our trial account. Let's try to refresh this. What do I see? So our first app exists, however the application package has been dropped. So for simplicity of understanding, let's try to drop the application as well. And at this point of time, what we will do is we will try to create the application package again. So let's create the application package again. I'm going to do a refresh. Let me try to create the application package again. Unable to use database. I think there's something wrong. I'm not okay. Let us try to use, let's say, Snowflake. Okay. I'm trying to create an application package. it got created. Let me use the application package. Let me create a schema called state contained within the application package. Let me create a stage within the application package and let me see the stages. Right? At this point of time, we will have to upload um, the necessary code artifacts to that particular stage which we just created. Let's see that. I'm going to go here, schemas, stage content, stages, app stage. Let me enable directory tables. I think it can use compute warehouse. That's okay. It's going to use native, and finally I'll upload the manifest file and the readme file under the root directory, and I'm going to upload datashare underscore consumer under my scripts directory. I think it's all set. Let's head over to worksheets, consumer data sharing. If I look at my stage, I can see manifest, readme and scripts file. This application does not exist. Let me try to rebuild the application or recreate the application at this point of time. The application is created. Now, if I go to the application under core, I see the stored procedure, read data and the update reference and nothing else. So at this point of time, if I try to execute read data, we will encounter an error, which is a very most welcome error. And the error says that the reference definition of housing data is missing. Now I need to set the reference. That means I need to request for the data, access, and the consumer needs to approve it. Now all of it happens when I go back to my applications. I see the installed version of my application. I click it to open the application, and finally I need to go to the security tab out here. If I go to the security tab, you see privileges to the objects. Privilege, if you remember, we requested for a select privilege on my manifest.yml, so that is why I see only select. On housing data, select table. So housing data is just a logical name. I can add any data to that for the time being. Because if you saw, I am just selecting star, so I have not even mentioned the absolute projection list from that particular table. So because I have mentioned star, I can read any table. Select data under DemoDB. Let's say I go to public. There's a table called customer data. Let me select it. I can save it. Let me go back to my worksheets, consumer data, and let me try invoking the store procedure once more. Wow, I can retrieve all the records, all the columns from the table which I have set as a reference, which is customer data. Now, even though I have called it housing data, doesn't matter. It is now referring, so it is the housing data reference is now pointing to the object which is customer data. At this point of time, if I do a show references in the application, our first tab, what you see that the name housing data having a label of housing data, it is now pointing to an object called customer data. This is what is most important. Now, what you can do is, while you read the data using the stored procedure called read data, we could have checked what is the object name in my references, or whether at all the references is set before even I query the table. Now, I did not do that. If you look at the stored procedure, I have no checks over there whether the reference is set. That is why I encountered the error when I executed the stored procedure before setting the reference. Had I not done that, if I would have put a check on the stored procedure that this select star from reference housing data will only be executed if the reference is set, otherwise it's going to return an error saying that the reference is not set, then I wouldn't have encountered that unhandled error, right? I think that brings us to the end of our this video, wherein we looked at how we can implement data security from a consumer perspective. If you have liked this video, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much for being a lovely audience, and see you in the very next lecture, wherein we are going to talk about automating the entire deployment process. Thank you again, and see you until next time. Bye bye.